Well, let's turn to drawMD. And this is a free app belonging to a suite of apps designed for iPad and created by Visible Health Incorporated. How was this idea born, and how did you proceed once you had the idea?
Well, the idea was very simple. I mean, Todd and I entered practice, and we saw a need. We saw a need where there is, there's a transition of information between you and the patient in a very limited amount of time, and we thought it was the mechanisms available for that are really inadequate. I mean, especially in a complex oncology practice, you're trying in a 45-minute visit, educate the patient about very complex anatomy, about very complex physiology, sort of the post-operative course. And we found ourselves talking about how we're drawing images on the exam rollout paper, tearing off those images and giving those to the patient. And the iPads were just sort of being announced, and we were on a conference call with our developers about Urology Match, and we sort of said, hey, could you develop a little, application for this iPad that's coming out where, we sort of thought the kidney stones would be lowest hanging fruit, sort of, here's your stone, here's its size, you can shrink and expand it, put it in the right anatomic location, show what a stent is, show what a nephrostomy tube is, because all of us as urologists put a lot of stents in. I think explaining a stent to a patient is very complex. You have to draw it all out, and most people think that a stent is really a short stent. That's the same thing as a cardiac stent. I mean, there's a lot of sort of very simple education that needs to take place. And again, I think the lesson here is you got to find a champion. I mean, all this stuff costs money, and you really got, in order to finance this, you got to find somebody who believes in you and your idea. And Boston Scientific was sort of the industry sponsor for this, where we just came to them with the idea and we said, we want to build this. Can you give us a little seed money for this? And those guys really stepped it up and gave us some seed money, and we put out the Urology drawMD app.
Was urology the first application for this type of program, or did this start in other?
It started urology. We thought, let's do what we know.
Right.
And so because the content is the key on this. It's not, the idea is one thing, and I think the idea is obviously very simple. We just need to use the iPad app to be able to show patients what's going on, help engage them, help them understand. But the content is the key. What are the images that we need? What are the background? What are the issues? What are we trying to teach and educate our patients with? And what can we send them home with that they can reflect on and make sure that they really understand what went on and remember what went on? And starting with what we know, that helped tremendously.
Had this been done in other specialties before?
No, this was
groundbreaking.
And interestingly, so other sort of other ventures have tried to enter the space, and so what Todd and I really realized early on is you really, in order for this to work, you have to be the specialist in that specialty. For instance, where an ENT begins a conversation with a patient about a certain pathology, Todd and I have no idea. This is not something that we do. And we engaged some consultants who know the ENT space and said, okay, when you sit down with a patient with a head and neck tumor, where do you start? What anatomy do you need to show? Same thing with the orthopods. And for the orthopods, it was actually very interesting. They said, you know what, I always have these anatomy images that show this cartilage, this muscle, but for this pathology, I really don't need that. I need to simplify that image and to really show this ligament and this, these structures in the shoulder. But for a different pathology in the shoulder, I need to show different things. So, engaging these consultants has really made the venture a success, because what other firms have done that entered the space after us, they basically had these pre-made images and you could doodle on them. That just doesn't work. It has to be a conversation, and has to be a predetermined process on how you counsel a patient through a certain consultation, with regard to pathology or with regard to disease process.
And what other specialties is this available for now?
It's correct me if I add some, I won't remember them all, but a lot. So cardiology, ENT, ophthalmology's coming out, orthopedics.
Wow.
Anesthesia, transplant, pediatrics,
Vascular.
thoracic, vascular.
General surgery. General surgery is actually our biggest app. That's, I mean, just explain, sitting in front of the patient, explaining the bowel diversions, the Hartman versus a loop colostomy versus a right colectomy. I mean, it basically makes that process so simple that that app is incredibly popular.
I was just speaking a few minutes ago to a urology program chair at a very major program who uses this all the time in his office.
It's great.
And how do you use it in your office?
I use it in my office, and that's what Todd and I was talking. I mean, this is a fun project, but when you're in the trenches in your office, I mean, we can have a project, but if it doesn't have utility for me in the office, I'm not going to use it. And what this does, this lowers barriers. This lets me transmit information faster and better to my patients, gets me out of the room faster, and the patient is more satisfied. I mean, this solves a big issue for a clinician. How do I use it in my office? I use it for prostatectomies. I think it lends itself incredibly well to prostatectomy. We can take it on an iPad. I can show you how you counsel a prostatectomy. In literally 45 seconds, you can explain the whole prostatectomy with the patient. We're in Philadelphia, both of us. It's a very competitive market. I see third opinions all the time. I have patients all the time telling me, "Doc, you explained it to me better than anybody's ever explained it to me." For cystectomy, I do a lot of cystectomies, explaining neobladders, versus indianas, versus ileoconduits, showing them the stents, the drains that they're going to wake up with. It makes this incredibly simple. Basically that part of the conversation is just several minutes for me to show them what drains that they can expect, how the sequence of the drains coming out, what the diversion options are, and I think it really sort of simplifies the conversation.
It's amazing how often you hear a patient say, "Wow, I've had this problem for 3 years, or I've seen 3 other physicians about this. This is the first time I understand what's going on." And that's a beautiful thing. That's what we're going for. And it's so hard to communicate what we know and what we think and our understanding of the options to our patients, especially when you're talking to patients about surgery.
I read an online review of the general surgery I draw, and this is what it said. While most of the illustrations I saw were generally accurate, as a trained medical illustrator, I would disagree that the illustrations are beautiful. This is my chief complaint about this app. It reminds me of student medical illustrations, better than a non-artist could produce, but not professional quality. The functionality and concept of this app is fantastic and incredibly useful in the clinic. Most people will find that the functionality alone makes the app indispensable. Are there any plans to improve the quality of the illustrations?
I love that review because it shows the nature of really somebody who doesn't understand this space. And so there are a lot of apps out there that have these just gorgeous three-dimensional images. Gorgeous. And they are unbelievably meaningless when you show them to a patient. And so what we've specifically sought out to do is to create very simple drawings that patients can look at and really understand the anatomy, as opposed to being distracted by the most beautiful images they've ever seen that are three-dimensional. And we do have an illustrator who's started to do our most recent applications. That is, her drawings are absolutely gorgeous. But again, it's not a three-dimensional, eye candy type of illustration. It really is, it's directed towards having the patient, helping the patient understand the anatomy and not be distracted by eye candy.
That's very, very true, very good. Very good answer. As more and more medical schools use tablets for training medical students, how do you perceive this will impact on this iDraw endeavor? Because now medical schools are giving them away to medical students.
But this is the future of medicine. I think, in our opinion, it's going to be tablet-based. Sitting at a desktop computer with your back to the patient, typing in notes and orders and talking to the patient behind you, that doesn't make any sense. Everything is electronic, but it's going to have to be tablet-based, where you sit shoulder to shoulder next to a patient. The iPad is a tool. It doesn't obstruct you. It's a tool to help explain things and help efficiently get the work done that you need to get done, and help explain things to the patients that they really need to understand to be able to make educated medical decisions. And so, without question, iPads are as they go into medical school, they're going to keep coming into our clinics. And so we are really trying to build more and more on top of our platform to expand the uses in that interaction.
The medical schools in the country that sort of give out an iPad to every student, and there's a big medical school that preloads drawMD on every iPad.
That's what I would think, yeah.
And you know, it's interesting, we have a lot of comments from nurses where they say, use this all the time to explain things to my patients that the docs don't have time to explain. So,
Huh.
yeah.
Is this available in a range of languages yet or not?
We've talked about it.
Talked about it.
As you allude to, Alex's Russian expertise, you know, there are opportunities, and actually several urologists from other countries have come to us and said, hey, where's the Spanish version? One of the great things about that patient, of course, is that it's image driven. It's not language driven. It's the images, but there are very interesting and really cool opportunities to do this.
So interesting, we got highlighted in the New York Times about 6 months ago, and the highlight was which apps should you preload on your iPad when you travel and you have a medical emergency. And we got highlighted because really this transcends language. You can all of a sudden explain to the physician, you know, in Asia, for instance, that you can't communicate with, where your cardiac stents are, where, you know, what pathology you have. So the New York Times sort of highlighted drawMD as an app that people should preload and have their physician preload images on the app so they can communicate medical information in places where they don't speak your language.
Well, you both have extremely busy and stressful full-time occupations as urologic oncologists in academic settings. How do you find the time for your outside business operations?
You know, time is tough to come by, but we look for spots. We look for times when you're driving the car and we can talk on the phone. So that's our typical time to talk and have our discussions about these different things we're involved in. Is when we're driving home from work. We have, you know, late night conference calls with our team. But it's something that you love and something that you're really driven to do, you find some time to make it work. The other thing you do is you get help. And so we have a fantastic development team for Urology Math. We have a fantastic development team for drawMD, and with John Cox, who's actually now our CEO of Visible Health. And so he really runs everything on a day-to-day basis, and he manages the team, and he's headed with building and pushing this forward and doing an amazing job.
I think the concept of, you know, if you want something done, get the busiest guy to do it kind of works. You sort of, the momentum is there. We have a lot of balls that are up in the air, but this is something that as long as you keep pushing the ball along, it sort of, you know, it happens.
And what's next? What new ideas do you have?
Well, should we
that you
really?
can talk about?
So we, well, why not? We'll talk about it. So we. It's interesting. We've been working with some medical students, you know, sort of both in the academic setting and in these ventures. And one thing that we see that's really lacking is some good test preparation software that's out there. So we're launching a venture called Q-Jitsu, like Jiu-Jitsu, where the weaker opponent can beat the stronger opponent using learned techniques. This is Q-Jitsu, and this is going to be a crowdsourced resource for students to first train for USMLEs, but maybe down the road to train for other exams as well. And so we're hoping to launch this summer. Yeah.
Well, how can our readers access your programs?
Well, so Urology Match is at urologymatch.com, and then drawMD can be downloaded from the Apple iTunes Store, also visiblehealth.com.
Thanks very much.
Great.